Welcome back to the shop. This week I'm going to be talking about lumber core plywood. And what that is using a hardwood core in multiple layers with a veneer on the outside. And so what I'm going to use for this lumber core is a poplar base, crossband that with poplar again, and then I'm going to take a walnut veneer and put that on the outside layer. So hopefully I come up with a superior product than using a commercially available core. I've shown you how I do that with a veneer and iron-on adhesive. I've shown you how I do it with a vacuum bag and commercially available MDF with a lumber core plywood. All of those things are great, but sometimes you want dead flat, dead accurate panels, and this is the way that you can accomplish that. I'm going to experiment with this panel. I hope you learned something along the way with me, and let's see how that turns out. So here we go. One of the first things you're going to notice is all of the pieces. So I have the core stave components. These will be put together with a walnut edging, because once the walnut is on the outside, I don't want to see all the layers of wood. We're going to then have these panels, which will be the cross banding. So in plywood, if you didn't know, every layer alternates back and forth, and that's what gives it the stability and the flatness that it should have in commercially available plywood. We'll do that on both sides. And then for the last step, we're going to take a veneered panel of walnut and crossband that back to the original orientation that we want. And hopefully that sandwich comes out dead flat, perfect. It's all hardwood. It's a lot of work, but in the end, it's a superior result. So I'm going to show you how I take all of these pieces, glue them up in individual steps, put them in the vacuum bag, and really come up with a nice piece of plywood. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was all of these boards were milled together and then sanded to a final thickness. The core I have is 1/4 inch thick. All of those pieces are 1/4 inch thick. My cross-banding layers are an 1/8 inch thick. The walnut veneers are an 1/8 inch thick. So if you add up 2 crossband pieces, 1 for each side, 2 veneer pieces, 1 for each side, plus the lumber core, we have a total thickness of 3/4 inch. You can do that however you'd like. One of the very first things that we're going to do is actually put together our cross-banding pieces. And what we're going to do is just run a little bit of glue between each seam so that we have a panel that we can work with as an individual piece instead of dealing with multiple components at once. So I'm just going to run glue on this tape on this back side, and we will glue the seam on the other side. So this is just to hold it in place temporarily. And so now that we have that together, I'm going to take my glue, fold up the piece, run a little dab of glue in there along the length, give it a good couple of open and closes, which spreads the glue pretty evenly. Do that again on the next piece. Looks like I have good coverage everywhere. I'm going to push that down and remove some of this excess. And I just take a putty knife and scrape. We'll clean up that even more after it's out of the press. And then to ensure that everything stays tight, we're going to take some blue tape across each seam and kind of pull it tight to stretch it, which then allows the tape to even pull on it even more. While we wait for those panels to dry, what we're going to do next is mess with the core. And with the core, none of this is actually glued together edge to edge. It's pretty interesting and drives me nuts, but it actually makes sense. When these panels go on, that allows these boards to flex into place and be as flat as possible because they're all the same thickness. So what I'm going to do is just line up my boards, get a straight edge, and get them close. All of these panels are oversized so that I get my final dimension that I want. So now that I have that lined up, I'm just going to run a simple piece of tape across an edge and pull these panels together as tight as I can. You can see putting tension on it. There we go. So I'm going to do that again down on this bottom side. Pulling as I apply the tape. So I'm going to roll this over and do the same thing on the other face, so that we have even clamping pressure with the blue tape on both sides. And what we're going to do next is actually apply glue here, spread it, and then put our cross-banding veneer panels over the top edge, just like that. Let me show you a mistake that I actually made. I'm used to using a plywood core, putting hardwood edging on, and then taking the walnut veneer and going right over the top of this so that when this is trimmed, I can shape this edge and it looks like walnut all the way through. What I did wrong on the lumber core was actually make the walnut the same thickness as the center core, forgetting about the fact that I have cross banding on both sides. So with cross banding on both sides, you go to the edge, even though my veneer goes on the outside, you're still going to see this poplar layer. So for this one, it's all right because it's a literal test panel, but the fix would be actually cutting a piece of walnut as thick as this sandwich, then veneering over that edge piece, giving you a walnut veneer all the way around the edge. After the panels have dried, I've removed some of the tape on the side that needs to be glued down. And then I'm just going to take a card scraper and just look for that seam and just lightly hit it to make sure that everything is flush and tight. These panels are so thin, there's really nothing to scrape, but there is a very slight difference in height that you can feel. We'll do that on the walnut as well. All right, so what we're going to do next is we're going to take our core that has the grain direction running with the length of the boards. We're going to take our cross banding, which will be running the opposite direction, as you can see here, and we're going to glue that on this side and then glue that on the other side, creating this cross band sandwich. And what that does is allow for the wood not to move at all, and it creates a very stable flat panel. The final step will be taking all this off, gluing it again with veneer cross banding over the core. Same concept happens, and we end up with our sandwich of homemade, shop-made plywood. For this stage, I'm going to use Gorilla Glue, and the reason that I'm doing that is because I'm allowing the glue as minimal amount of water introduction to the wood as possible. So what I really like about this glue is that you can just mist the boards right prior to adhering them, and it introduces the minimum amount of moisture, keeping the panel as flat as possible. So I'm going to show you that now. You just across the glue. I go back with sure everything. Something to help. Now that we've got that panel applied, what I'm going to do is take a mister, because this glue takes a little bit of water to activate, and I'm just going to very quickly and lightly hit this panel with a mist of water. Again, we're cross-banding, so I'm going to lay this panel down, and I'm actually going to leave this edge a little long on the walnut side so that I have a straight edge later when I go to square this panel up. I'm going to take some tape and just hold it down temporarily in place. Now, where that over the Gorilla Glue has a lot of properties that work well for this panel, but it does not like the plastic bag that the vacuum press uses. So everything needs to be covered just in case any of that glue sticks. It will not come off of the plastic bag. As you've seen me do before, I use a breather mesh material which allows the air to go all the way around the panel and not get stuck on the bag. And I just wrap the piece in that, making sure that everything is covered. You can do this with a platen on larger panels. I would definitely use a platen to keep everything flat, but for something like this, the breather mesh should be sufficient. Literally just take the panel, slip it in the bag. Make sure that everything's still covered. Make sure that our air inlet is over the piece. We're going to seal the bag up and get the pump running. So I may use the platens. We'll show you that. So because the board had a little bit of twist, I'm going to quickly add some melamine sheets, hopefully to help flatten this out. I'm going to put one on each side of the panel. And normally these platens would have grooves cut in them to make sure every bit of air that could go around it could go around it. And then it's run. After 2 hours, I'm going to go ahead and pull the vacuum bag open, and we'll pull the panel out, check it out, and add our veneer. Same process. because the plastic was on. It went in super easy, didn't stick to the bag. Next up, we're going to pull all this tape off so that I have a glue surface to use. What you'll find is after the vacuum bag, the tape is a lot harder to pull off. So it's just a tedious process. All right, now that all the glue is removed, next step is going to be clean this up with the scraper, apply some glue to the cross banding, take our veneer, and we are going to, again, change orientation of the grain and apply this, put it in the sandwich, vacuum bag, and other than cleaning up our edges and our final dimension, this panel will be done. And here I'm going to go with Tight Bond 2 Dark, and that's because I have walnut. The reason I use the dark is if any glue creeps out during the veneering process, it'll dry super dark and match the walnut really well. So here I'm just evenly distributing all the glue to the panel, and we're going to work as quickly as possible. Everything needs to be super even and covered completely. Line up the edge again. And simply flip and root. Same process with our tape. We're going to move back over to our vacuum bag, putting the piece in same place it was between the mesh and the clamping cauls, platens. Close the bag up and do it again. All right, let's go ahead and pull the vacuum bag again. Pull the panel, square it up, check it out. Everything is attached, pressed down. You can see the creep that I was talking about. Some of it actually came out, and that's why I used the dark. It either goes through a void or something in the wood. Obviously, this is just for practice, this veneer. isn't the most perfect wood there ever was, but we'll clean that up. All right, so the next step we're going to do is we are going to rip this board, get rid of all this excess, put it on the cross-cut sled, and using this as a reference, we're going to cut our ends off to a final dimension. So typically this panel would sit overnight before you sand or do anything, allowing the glue to dry fully. And because this is just a test panel, I am going to go ahead and put some shellac on there just to seal it and show you the details of the finish, what it really looks like on the edge profile of the panel is what I'm trying to say. This is resawn walnut, as you saw. From one board. All the core is poplar, and I'm just going to soak this, get it in, and we'll let that kind of set up, and then I'll bring it in close and show you the edge details so you can really see how this panel went together, all the pieces, how tight they fit together. It's all pretty impressive, really. Vacuum is one of my favorite ways to clamp anything. Okay. All right, everything has dried up overnight. We have our lumber core plywood panel. I want to take this panel and just show you all the details and take a close look at this core and what it looks like. Why in the world would you use lumber core? Well, it's a superior panel to commercially available stuff. Some of the reasons would be I can make this veneer whatever I want it to be. I just happen to have a board of walnut, cut it into multiple pieces, and one little small offcut covered the panel that I needed. And guess what? It's shop sawn veneer. It's super thick, super durable. The core is as solid as can be. The panel is dead flat. There are so many reasons why this is a superior panel to commercially available plywood. Yes, it takes longer, but for some pieces, this is required, and this is the go-to item that I'm gonna start using. So I hope you learned something. Let me take you and show you up close what this looks like. Again, we're looking at this lumber core panel, and as you can see here, the center core of poplar. Then we have our cross banding layers, which you can see as the lighter color, and then finally our veneer layer. And all of that comes together to form the lumber core plywood. So if you take a look at this little offcut piece that I have and really come in close, you can see that our grain direction for the core is going up and down. Our cross banding layer goes horizontally, and then back to our veneer layer, and we go back to the same orientation as our core. So that sandwich together forms the lumber core plywood, if I can get it to focus. And that is a very cool product. One of my favorite parts about this is the fact that this was all from a board, and I was able to book match the wood. So in any kind of specialty veneer piece or any wood that's just beautiful that you want to use, you can get a piece that has unique character versus a commercial plywood. And as you saw in my mistake here, what I was attempting to do with this walnut piece was actually have walnut edging, with the veneer going over the top so that that could be totally shaped and profiled and it would be walnut all the way through. What I forgot about when I was building it was that on lumber core, the veneer goes on a cross-banded layer instead of just over the core. So I'm used to using plywood, adding edging, and then veneering over the top. Well, that doesn't work on this one. All right, there you have it. Lumber core plywood this week. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something. I know I did. I learned that lumber core plywood is far superior to the commercial plywood that I've bought in the past, the veneered plywood that I've bought in the past. Obviously, this is a tedious process. It's for a special project. A lot of times I'm still going to use the plywood because of ease and the fact that it's in the back of a cabinet or something that doesn't really matter. But really, when it comes down to it, if I want something special, I'm gonna build and take the time to build this lumber core plywood. It's far superior. I can make it out of whatever veneer I want, whatever thickness I want. It doesn't matter. I control every aspect of the build. So it's a good task, good tool to have in the belt. And I hope that you enjoyed this video as much as I did building it. I want to have you continue following along, and I will see you next week with another video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel so that I can keep doing this and growing our audience and growing the community of people that want to learn about woodworking. So thanks for joining me, and I will see you next week.